Good afternoon and a warm welcome to European Policy Center online policy dialogue on women in war zones. My name is Ionela Ciolan and I'm a research fellow within the Europe in the World program here at EPC. Today I have the pleasure to moderate this discussion. Violence, armed conflicts, and war have severely affected men and women around the world. Nevertheless, as the UN Resolution 1325 on Women, Peace and Security suggests, women and girls are affected and experience conflict aggressions differently. During conflict, the violence against women and girls, including sexual attacks and exploitation, increases 2 or 3 times than in peaceful situations. Random killings, sexual violence, torture, or forced marriages are part of the devastating consequences suffered by women in warfare. Throughout history, rape and sexual violence were employed as tactics of war. So we already see these elements, which the negative consequences of war is bringing to women's lives. But also we have to keep in mind that the destruction and disruption of social services and essential needs like food, water, health, electricity, transportation, medical care adds another layer of unequal impact on girls and women's lives. United Nations observes that in war and post-war states, the maternal mortality phenomenon increases 2.5 higher than the average rate. While women are sufferers and casualties of fighting and warfare, their role in welfare and in conflict is more complex. Women can also be combat fighters with an active role in the battlefields. They can be aiding partners. They can be newly breadwinners and family financial caretakers. In conflict and post-conflict situation, women are also agents of change, being an important key element in conflict prevention, rebuilding, and sustaining reconstruction and peace-building processes. So this policy dialogue tackles the nexus between women, security, and peace. And for this, we have a stellar panel of speakers lined up for you, including Olga Tokariuk. She's a Ukrainian-based journalist and non-resident fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis. Lina, Tori, she's the founder and executive director of Dastan. I hope that I'm pronouncing that correctly. And Tamila Gvadzhava. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, so I apologize for that. Junior project manager at Berghof Foundation. I'm very grateful to our speaker for making the time to contribute today to our discussion. Now some logistical informations. After we'll have the opening remarks from our distinguished speakers, we'll start the Q&A session. So please write your questions in the Q&A box, or if you want to address them yourself, click on the raise hand button. Please be concise as much as possible when addressing your questions. Now, let me start our discussion with you, Olga. The Russian invasion of Ukraine, basically it's heartbreaking and brought so many challenges around Europe and especially in Ukraine. So I would like you to start, because I understand that you are still based in Ukraine, to give us an overview of the consequences of the war in Ukraine on women and girls' lives.
Hello, and thank you for being here and listening. Well, yes, I'm in Western Ukraine at the moment, and I'm intending to stay in Ukraine for as long as I can, although, of course, I'm also facing a difficult choice because I'm not just a journalist, I'm also a mother. I have a 6-year-old daughter, and of course, her safety is my top priority. So as long as it is safe in the location where I'm currently staying, I will stay here. But of course, if the situation deteriorates, then maybe I will be forced to leave Ukraine. And when I'm saying safe, you know, it's relatively safe, of course. I'm speaking to you from a basement, actually, of my house, because that's the place, you know, where we are hiding when there are like air raid alerts. And I'm just not sure that for the next hour, there will be no alert. That's why I'm basically working from the basement all the time and joining the events and speaking with the media, just to be sure that, you know, I'm not getting interrupted by a siren and have to rush from my room to the basement. And fortunately, you know, we have internet connection here functioning normally. So that allows me also to continue working while, of course, being affected by this war, as everyone, every Ukrainian citizen is. And of course, also the level of, you know, how different citizens and different women are affected is also different depending on where in Ukraine they live, on the circumstances of, you know, their personal circumstances, and whether they have a network of support, where to flee if they want to flee the war. Do they have an opportunity actually to flee the war? Because as we know, there are cities and parts of Ukraine that are cut off from the rest of the country, like Mariupol, of course. This is like the case in point, a city of almost 500,000 people before the war, the Azov Sea in southeastern Ukraine, that has been besieged by Russia for a month already, where people do not have access to drinking water, food, medicine, and basic necessities. And at least 5,000 people are confirmed killed there, among them 200 children. You know, just this number of 200 children is something like really heartbreaking, just in one place, just in one city. And these are, of course, just the official numbers, and the real toll is probably much, much higher. So as I said, you know, the war, it affects everyone, and it affects people in different manner. And speaking, like, just to conclude the Mariupol that I mentioned, you've probably all seen the images of a bombed maternity hospital there, and the pregnant women, some of whom have actually, you know, later lost their children. Their children died, newborn babies, and some of them also died while giving birth, or as a result of another Russian bombing, because according to some testimonies from Mariupol, from witnesses who were there, some of these pregnant women were later transferred to the drama theater, another location that was bombed by Russia several days after the maternity hospital, despite the signs saying children in front, you know, and then the behind of this building. So Russia deliberately destroys civilian targets, residential complexes, hospitals, objects, you know, buildings where people are sheltering, where they are, you know, hoping to be safe from Russian bombs and missiles. But it looks like there is no safe place in Mariupol, at least, that's for sure. So of course, you know, my thoughts are with you know, those people, women and children who were deliberately, you know, struck by Russian missiles and lost their lives in this absolutely senseless, atrocious war that Russia launched against Ukraine. While, of course, you know, there is nothing comparable to their situation and to the tragedy, you know, that affected these people and their loved ones. We are seeing this tragedy unfolding on so many levels. And those women who, you know, maybe their life is not in danger, they are still feeling the consequences of this war. There are numerous reports of rape committed by Russian soldiers, and also soldiers from Chechnya, Kadyrov forces close to Kyiv, in the suburbs that were temporarily under Russian control, close to Kyiv, such as Irpin and Bucha. Irpin has been liberated by Ukrainian troops several days ago, and we will probably hear more of the stories of survivors from Irpin and of women who were abused and who were raped in the public space. And that was also confirmed by Ukrainian authorities. And there was an article in the Times newspaper. There was one story of one woman, a 33-year-old Ukrainian woman, who was raped repeatedly by several Russian soldiers who killed her husband before that, while her child was in a nearby room and like screaming for help and in horror at, you know, probably like hearing the sounds and everything that was going on. So completely atrocious, terrible crimes that are happening, and that, of course, you know, I do not think, you know, like anything else can be like compared or more atrocious than that. And just to conclude, even, you know, in the women who are fleeing Ukraine and who are fleeing areas affected by fighting, they still feel also like they might have not been affected like directly by the violence, but they are feeling the effects of this war. Because as you know, basically a lot of families are separated now in Ukraine, and only women and children are allowed to leave the country, and elderly people as well. So a lot of families are separated, with men remaining in Ukraine, enrolling in the army, or just, you know, helping in other areas, like continuing to do their jobs, or trying to, because a lot of people also left their jobs, obviously. And this is another dimension of this war and of this tragedy, you know, all those separated families, all those women who were forced to flee with their children, and who are now struggling, being refugees in other countries, to kind of relaunch their lives without knowing how long they will be able, you know, they will have to live separated from their husbands, from the rest of their family, and when they will be able to return to Ukraine, if at all, you know. So that's like another dimension of this war, and how women in particular were affected.
Thank you very much, Olga, for this update, and it's important for our audience to understand also the women perspective on the war, because as I also wrote a piece on 8th of March, this war is also Putin's wars against Ukrainian women, and also Ukrainian women are basically highly affected by the war, with several consequences, and their voices should also be included in all the international organizations' policy or strategies. So we need a gendered approach to all these humanitarian and emergency assistance. Now I'd like to move to you, Lina, because you are coming from another part of the war, from Afghanistan, which was torn by war and conflict for several decades. And since last year, we also have the return of the Taliban rule, the government of Afghanistan. So this brings another dimension of human rights violation, and also especially women's rights violation. Can you provide to our audience an overview of the consequences of the war in Afghanistan for women's lives, and how it's currently the situation for women in the country?
Thank you so much, Ionela and EPC, for having us. And I also want to acknowledge and welcome our sisters Tamila and Olga. And thank you, Olga, despite everything you're going on, to take the time to be here, and for sharing what you're experiencing. I'm sure it's traumatizing what you're sharing. So again, thanks for being here. First, I want to acknowledge the resiliency of the women impacted by war, because it's their strength, their leadership that contributes not to just saving lives, but to allow lives to continue. For those who are able to stay in the country, they become breadwinners of the family in situations, especially when male chaperones are not existent. In the times when forced displacement happen, they become the leaders to carry their families, to carry their lives, and to make a living, and to step in the shoes of a place of mother, father, the whole family, to figure out this whole journey of the forced displacement and refugees. So as much as there's negative impact on women's lives, their resilience and their strength and their leadership needs to be given credit. As we have discussed already, Olga had already mentioned, women have and continue to pay a heavy price by war, whether that be from losing their lives to losing their rights to losing their lives. In regards of consequence of war, how it has impacted women's lives in Afghanistan, there are different ways. First, women's presence and role in society. We have recently seen the passing of this requirement of leaving the house with a chaperone. We get news that the taxis in the country have been directed not to take women solo travelers. This kind of restrictions has in general put a diminished and low existence of women being in public or being present in public. And second, women's rights. Women's education. We have seen that women and girls are mostly banned from education. This past Monday, we saw a reversal of girls, adolescent girls, being able to go to school, and the doors of the schools were closed to them. We've seen women's mobility travel alone has restricted. Even this includes of women, how far they can travel to go to school. If they can leave the country, even on flights, they need a male chaperone. Women's freedom of clothing, there's a restriction of what they should wear, or it has been used as an excuse of, you cannot go to school because we don't have the proper environment, the proper hijab for you. Third, women's access to jobs. We see less or actually no women in leadership positions or in government positions. The current regime that's made, I don't see any woman in any of those leadership positions. Women are banned from taking public positions unless it is in healthcare areas. Women's economic independence, there's lack of jobs. For those who are widows, those who have lost the male members of their family, it has led to really poor economic situation. It's not just their lives that they have to take care about, it's also their children. It's also about families of 7, 9, 10 children that they have to provide. We get stories of women who have not ate for 3 days. We have stories of women who have babies who are affected by malnutrition over and over, that are going to have really, really poor health in the coming years, and some of these children will not make it out of the situations. We have also seen poor access of women to justice and law. For those who are seeking justice, for those who need to hold their perpetrators of violence or assault accountable, there's really no door or no resource to go to, because one, there's really not a really understanding of what is law, which law to follow. And the second one is a lack of accountability for seeking justice. From who do you even seek justice for the situations that you're experiencing, and for the crimes that are being committed against you? Additionally, we've seen threat of sexual violence. We've seen scenarios of rape and killing towards women. In the news, at times I've seen that there are certain women's bodies who have been found in a certain neighborhoods in the country with the evidence that they have been raped, and they were basically left in the trash and killed. Of course, we have also seen forced internal displacement of millions in the country, and forced displacement of external displacement of millions in the country, of people who still need to figure out their lives. And again, women become the center of this, because they will have to take care of the family, or they put in that situation of take care of the family, provide for them, provide for themselves and everyone around them. And lastly, there is brain drain. We're losing a whole generation that was well educated, that was well connected to the world, that have lost the country because the country is not a welcoming space for them anymore. So these are some of the examples of what we currently witness there. And we're really concerned about a generation of young women and girls that are growing up right now that are the serious threat of not ever receiving education, not ever gaining economic dependence, or having their civil liberties if the ruling, if the policies during the current new regime does not change.
Thank you very much, Lina. As Lina mentioned, we also have a humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, especially a food crisis. And probably in our next interaction, I will also ask you about this and the response of the international organizations. But until then, I would also want to give the floor to Tamila and for her initial remarks. And Tamila, I know that you've been working with women and civil rights projects on Georgia's breakaway Abkhazia province. So I would like to give us more about the consequences of the Georgian war in 2008 on women's lives, and what is the current situation?
First of all, thank you very much for giving the space and opportunity to speak out and to be listened to, and thank you for your words, Lina and Olga. I think people from conflict zones understand what you're saying, because we're all human beings, and on emotional level, people who experience the war, they can't stay with a cold heart when they hear such stories you have told us. I will make a small correction maybe. I'm working in a project on a history dialogue, which bases on a private stories, personal stories of people who participated in war, experienced war, witnessed war during the Georgian-Abkhaz War in 1992, 1993, but both men and women. But today, mostly I will be concentrated on women part of our project. Shortly to describe what women have experienced after the war in Abkhazia, I would say there are also similarities with what Lina has said, saying that women were breadwinners. Yeah, after the war. In our case in Abkhazia, there was the same situation after the war, in the conditions when many men died or became disabled. Women became the one who needed to care about their families, needed to maintain the families. And the situation became much worse 1 year later after the end of the war, because of the sanctions and blockade that was imposed on Abkhazia, especially on men who were at the age of 16 till 60, and they were not allowed to go to cross the border with Russia. And the women were the ones who were able to take agriculture products, cross the border, sell these products, and bring everyday groceries and products back to Abkhazia. So they became a kind of breadwinner for the family. And you can see here, this is the changes of the gender role, yeah, after the war. And this is one aspect, yeah, how the war influenced on women in Abkhazia. But there is also one more important aspect I want to mention. I would say that women became rehabilitators, because after the war there was no state rehabilitation programs or any other initiatives that would help people to work with the pain and trauma they experienced during the war. And maybe it could sound strange, yeah, saying that women were rehabilitators, because they were also traumatized. They also needed to be rehabilitated, and not less as women, but as men, but because they lost their sons, brothers, fathers, husbands during the war, and they needed also to also be rehabilitated. But in the conditions when men were more traumatized, yeah, or in the condition when the family lost the male part, they needed to try to be also rehabilitators for its family, not only like maintain the family or be a person who can financially support the family, but trying to rehabilitate the ones who experienced the war but survived. Yeah, and maybe I will give you two examples as we work with personal stories and we record in our project the stories of people who experienced the war. I just want to give you two examples that you can understand what I mean saying that women were rehabilitators after the war. The first example is the short episode of the woman who has a brother. And this brother lost his wife and kids in a helicopter that was shot down during the war. It's known in Abkhaz society as a Lata tragedy. It's a small village where the helicopter was shot down. And it's a huge trauma for the man, yeah, to lose the woman and the wife and the kid in this helicopter tragedy. And the person was so traumatized that he didn't want to leave. Yeah, and in this situation, the sister, she was trying to talk to him. She was trying to help to overcome these emotions and the pain. And in order, her brother will not take alcohol or drugs, yeah, or make suicide, because there are many situations that such kind of situation that happened after the war with men. She found the woman and the future wife. And as she said, she almost forced her brother to marry this woman. And nowadays he's happy, he has a family. And it's a kind of rehabilitation that this woman has done for her brother. And I would say that after the war, it was not so consciously done, maybe unconsciously, that the woman didn't understand that she's doing for the society. Yeah, this personal stories she was trying to maintain her family and try to her brother to overcome this trauma and pain with this way. And the second short story of the mother who lost her son, and he was 17 years old when he participated in the war, and he was the only son in this family. And it was a huge tragedy for the father, who survived, but also participated in the war, but survived, and for the mother. And after the war, they decided to adopt the boy, and trying to like rehabilitate their family, trying to raise this boy as it was their own son. So there are many such kind of stories. I can tell you, but we don't have time. It's very invisible when you look at the society, yeah. But when you knock on the doors of these people and ask them how they were living after the war, you can hear such kind of stories, how they were trying to rehabilitate themselves. And in this situation, women also played a huge role, I would say. And one more point about political life. He would say there was not so much space for women to play a political role, because they were taking care of to maintain their family, and women decreased their role in political arena, because the man in Abkhazia is a defender, is a hero, and they are the ones who had nexus to the power, and that's why they took this role and came to the political arena more than the women have done. And if we look, for instance, on the parliament that was before the war, then there were 6 women presented in the parliament, and after the war 4, and then closer to the current situations, it's only 1 woman in the parliament. So we see also in numbers how the role of women in political arena decreases. And also in Abkhazia, there are successful women who have respect in the society, but they are not eager also to participate in elections, because they ask themselves, like, will I cope with it? Will I be voted for? Could I speak about the taboo topics? Will I be able to touch upon the sensitive topics? And that's why, speaking about the current situation, I would say that women have a space to be successful, to participate on a society level, to make this civil society much stronger, but they don't have a space to play political role or to make important decisions.
Thank you very much, Tamila. For our audience, as you already heard from our distinguished speakers, there are different consequences of the war and conflicts on women's lives. It also depends on the mentality of those countries, how well is it internalized the patriarchalism and conservatism inside those society, and also depends a lot on women movements and also the support of international organizations to support women involvement into society. I would like to move forward with another question about the current war in Ukraine. And my question for you, Olga, is because I was reading these days about the Russian troops' aggression against the local and foreign journalists on the ground in Ukraine, and having facts and also good information from the ground is quite vital for us to understand the war. So can you give us an overview of what's happening there and what's the situation of the local and foreign journalists in Ukraine?
Well, Russia has been deliberately targeting journalists in Ukraine with the goal to prevent, the world from knowing about the war crimes that it is committing. And there are different figures about the number of journalists who are already killed in Ukraine. Well, according to my calculus, it's at least 6 people. And I knew 2 of them personally, cameraman by Ukrainian cameraman Yevgeny Sakun, who was the first victim of this war, journalist victim. He was killed by Russian missile strike in Kyiv. He was my former colleague. We worked together on Ukrainian TV more than 10 years ago. And also a Fox News cameraman, Pierre Zakrzewski. I just met him briefly in early February this year in Kyiv. He was filming an interview with me for his TV station. We had a brief chat. And obviously there are also other journalists whom I didn't know, but who lost their lives in this war, and including women. There is at least 1 woman who was killed, a female journalist. Actually 2 of them. Yeah, one a Russian journalist, and another one was a producer for Fox News, a Ukrainian journalist. And many of these journalists, if not all of them, it looks like they were targeted deliberately. They were wearing press signs, they were wearing bulletproof vests and helmets, and they were traveling in cars with the signs, press or TV, and still they were targeted, they were deliberately shot at. Then there are journalists who have been kidnapped and who disappeared and about whom we don't know anything, and those who fortunately have been released. One of them is yet another, my former colleague from Hromadske TV, an independent television station in Ukraine where I worked for 6 years as an international news correspondent, head of foreign news desk, and also as a TV presenter. So my colleague Victoria Roshchina, she was detained by Russian occupiers in Berdyansk in southern Ukraine on March 15, and she spent several days in captivity, and with a lot of pressure applied on her, like psychological pressure by Russian intelligence officers who were interrogating her and forcing her to, denounce her own reporting and give them some sort of information. They were accusing her of being a spy, the one affiliated with Ukrainian secret services and other sorts of nonsense. Well, fortunately for Victoria, she was released several days after that, after being forced to record a video in which she was pressured to thank Russian soldiers for saving her life. Well, obviously the video was made under duress and it was a price to pay for being free. And I'm very happy that she's free. And she told for her media, for Hromadske, like this circumstances of her detention. But there are a lot of other journalists who have disappeared without trace, and some of them in Kyiv region, covering the situation in the villages and towns that are under Russian occupation at this moment, and where civilians and journalists have been targeted deliberately. We don't know anything about the fate of Max Levin, a photographer, a war reporter who's been working on the war, covering the war in Ukraine since 2014. He disappeared around March 12 in a village north from Kyiv, and nothing is known about his whereabouts. Also in southern Ukraine, in those areas that Russian forces are in control of, there were reports of local journalists being kidnapped and disappearing, and there was specifically one story of a journalist from Melitopol who managed to flee the town, when Russian forces were entering it. So while Russians didn't manage to capture her, they captured her 75-year-old father. And basically they said that they will release him only if she returns and only if she gives up, resigns from the position at the head, as the head of one of, local media. And eventually she had to do that. Like she had to resign. And what Russians are doing in this territories that they are controlling in southern Ukraine, they are switching off all Ukrainian broadcasters. They're switching off Ukrainian radio and TV stations. And instead they start broadcasting Russian state-owned media, propaganda media, spreading, all sorts of lies about Ukraine and inciting hatred towards Ukraine and justifying Russia's war and Russia's aggression. And they are, there are reports of them like continuing to apply pressure on many local journalists in the occupied territories to resign. They are kidnapped, they are arrested, they are pressured, their family members are threatened, like completely pure terrorist tactics, But at the same time, I have to say that a lot of my colleagues and female colleagues, they continue to work despite, all the dangers and despite all the hardship and risks for their lives. And I admire their work. Like some of my colleagues, of my good friends, they are staying in Kyiv, covering the situation there. Some other colleagues are traveling across Ukraine, to Kharkiv, to Chernihiv, to Zaporizhia, where the people from Mariupol are fleeing to, and all the stories that we know about survivors of Mariupol, they are being recorded mostly in Zaporizhia, which is like the next, big city on Ukrainian territory, where people are able to, get, if they manage to escape Mariupol. And they are telling their stories to journalists there. So I can say that, female journalists are showing incredible courage, by reporting from the biggest hotspots in Ukraine. They are showing that they are great professionals who are, willing to take great risks despite like all the odds and despite all the stereotypes. And I have like great respect and admiration for the work they are doing.
Thank you very much for sharing with us this information, Olga. And I also have great respect for the women and the men of Ukraine, and also the international journalists who are on the ground sending us correct information and facts of the war, because it's quite vital to understand the situation and have a real sense of what's going on in Ukraine nowadays. I would like to go back to what you're mentioning, Lina, about the humanitarian crisis, which is unfolding also in Afghanistan. And my question for you is, can you give us more details about this humanitarian crisis, and also what is the international organization's response to the crisis?
Thank you so much, Ionela. I'm sure, as you have seen on the news, that this was declared, the humanitarian situation in Afghanistan was declared as one of the biggest, if not the biggest, in the world. And this was really affecting millions of people. More than half of the population was at risk of starvation, especially during the months of winter. Because of that, millions were internally displaced. Many were really at risk of death from the cold, from lack of a shelter, lack of food, lack of heat. In a way, personally, I'm hopeful now. I'm like, winter is over, the spring is coming, the weather is getting better. But overall, the humanitarian situation in Afghanistan, it is urgent and it continues. There's imminent collapse of health and nutrition, education, and other social services to children and families. As you may have seen, organizations that like UNICEF put a call out for the international community to issue an appeal to fund, to help to address this humanitarian needs in Afghanistan, because at the end of it, the center of this humanitarian needs is not the groups that are mostly impacted is children and it's women, and because of the current regime and the change in regime, because of disruption of war, there's a lot of disruption that continues to this day in health, in nutrition services, and food. There's food crisis, there's drought, there's outbreaks of measles, polio, in addition to what we see as COVID. And children and women continue to be paying the highest price for these. But I think for the most part, we have seen a kind of encouragement in regards to international community coming together to address the humanitarian needs, but the work still needs to be going on, and it has not been enough to really solve the situation. And I think it is really a long-term project that is, if we don't put our heads together, I think it's going to have major consequences, as it already had.
Thank you very much, Lina. And I would also, because I would like to keep the focus on what are the international organization responses to this situation, I would also want to ask Tamila to tell us more if there are women involvement in negotiation or reconstruction processes, or the international organization are supporting initiatives of women empowerment on the ground.
Yeah, there are different international organizations who, with the help and assistance of local organizations, are trying to work on empowerment of women, and also the processes which includes women who can play a crucial role in peacebuilding processes. But they differ from each other, of course, because like if we talk about women empowerment, that there are also like meetings, trainings, workshops for women. It's a difficult process and not easy to because there are some sensitive topics that will be difficult to arise if we talk about domestic violence, because after the war, it also can be mentioned that there was a rise of domestic violence because of the, again, lack of rehabilitation for men. So somewhere this aggression and the pain needed to go out, and sometimes so it was directed also against women, but it's a very sensitive topic. You cannot easily to speak about it, and if you especially if you come from outside and say you have a problem, you take several, for instance, several women and say you have a problem, it's domestic violence, and or you have a problem, then of course people start to defend themselves. They take a protect position, and that's difficult to speak about such kind of topics very open. That's why the organization also try to find the correct way and language to raise this topic and work with it. Maybe I mostly will be concentrating on the other topic, on the role of women in the peacebuilding process that I'm more close to. If we speak about the women and their role in the peacebuilding process, I think they can play, and they play a crucial role. In comparison with men, they have more abilities, they may have more capacity and space to speak, because if we, for instance, look at the men, and as I said, the men in Abkhazia, they are considered as a patriotic, they are heroes, and there's a kind of cliche, it's locked themselves from being a human, from being a person who can tell about the trauma experience, about emotions. And that's why men in Abkhazia, they don't talk a lot about the war or what they have experienced. They even don't talk about it in their families, maybe only sometimes when they meet also other veterans. But in the case of the women, they don't have this kind of cliche that men have, so they can speak about the emotions. And the women, they know all the price that people pay when they participate in the war, and they can tell the stories, and they're doing, for instance, in our process, they are talking about their personal stories. Mothers talking about the sons, they're talking about husband, how they overcome the old challenges they have experienced after the war, and they can't have a right to speak. Yeah. But what is important when you work with the sensitive topics and with this situation, and someone can describe this as a problem, yeah, but it's a fact that that we have after the war, and there are also some other cultural things that influence on how women should behave in a peace building process, and you need to find the right way to make these things that can create negative dynamic and transfer it in the positive one. So you need, for instance, I will give you an example. If you take 10 men, yeah, and who participated into the war, and you bring them together and you try to speak about the war, they will not speak about it, or maybe they will be speaking about it from the role of patriot or of hero. But if you bring into this discussion several women and also bring young ladies and boys, then you create a space for the people, such kind of veterans, that they start to open themselves, and you start the process of rehabilitation. And here the woman can play a huge role.
Thank you very much. This is also interesting to understand the different dynamics of how women are involved, also impacted in the war, but also post-war reconstruction processes. And now my question is to all of you, because you been there in the country, you are coming from these war-torn countries and conflicts. How was the conflict and war affected you personally as women? And may I start with Olga?
Well, you know, it's still very fresh, and it's very difficult to assess like how it affected me, because it's still unfolding. Well, of course, there was a war in Ukraine since 2014, when Russia first invaded and occupied and the next Crimea, and invaded parts of Donetsk and Luhansk regions. However, you know, that war was limited to a relatively small part of Ukraine, in the eastern part of Ukraine. I was living in Kyiv. So, you know, of course, it affected me because it changed the life in the country. It had an impact on the economy. And, you know, of course, like all the stories of people, you know, who are forced to flee, that there was an impact, but that is, I'm afraid, incomparable to the impact that we are still going to face and analyze and put up with after this full-scale, you know, invasion that was launched a month ago. So it's still like ongoing. But like if I have just to assess like how my life has changed, like at this point, this day, today, when we were speaking, well, of course, I had to leave my house. I had to leave my home in Kyiv, and to, you know, bring my daughter and my family to safety, to relative safety, as I said at the beginning of Western Ukraine. I'm, you know, kind of lucky and privileged that I'm still together with my family, that I don't have to worry about, you know, their safety, because we are all together, and none of my like closest family lives in the areas that are affected by the fighting. So in this sense, it's just, you know, a luck that it was like this, not a choice, just a matter of luck, and of the fact that they were living in Western Ukraine. And of course, you know, the impact, well, there is an impact on my child who cannot go to school, because obviously schools are not working. So I'm like now kind of, I'm trying to, you know, continue working as a journalist, but I also have more like burden, because I'm, you know, I have to organize childcare and education for my child, because in order for me to be able to continue work, there should be someone who will be taking care of my child at this time, right? If there is no school, if like all the previous networks are not functioning anymore. So luckily there are, you know, family members who are helping with that, and so I'm like really grateful for having this support network. And without it, it would have been much difficult for me. And I'm also trying to organize for her at least an online school here, you know, in our new place. And actually from this week, she started like with a new school, with a new teacher, her education in here in Western Ukraine. But of course, like I think the major, like the most important thing for now is this complete state of total uncertainty and, you know, insecurity, because I don't know whether I will be safe and my family will be safe tomorrow in 1 hour. You know, what's going to happen next. I'm just living by the day and do not plan anything. And, you know, when you invited me to this event a couple of weeks ago, I told you, well, I don't know if I will be able to participate because it seems still so far away and so many things can happen. And this, you know, like this thing, that total like insecurity and uncertainty and also the tragedy that is unfolding, that is happening in my country, that is affecting my friends, you know, my family members, my connationals, like seeing cities that I loved, that I used to visit destroyed, you know, losing people I knew, and seeing other people, like other friends, joining the army, joining the resistance and risking their lives. And these people are coming from all spheres of life, you know, like human rights activists, lawyers, teachers, are now taking up arms and going to fight because they, you know, we are all risking like to lose our country and to lose our freedom, because we know what's going to happen if Russians win, you know, they will just exterminate at least all those active Ukrainians who are contributing to the development of this country, to, you know, building the Ukraine as a democracy, as a free and independent state. So, you know, there is also this dimension of like risks to like one's personal safety. So while I'm kind of trying to take precautions and, you know, move into a safer, relatively safer part of the country, I can never be sure that I'm 100% safe here, and that my, you know, my family is 100% safe. So, and while I'm determined to stay in Ukraine and continue reporting from here, I also have to reassess this risk and the situation every day. You know, every day I have to make again the decision, okay, like, what's my plan? Like, am I staying? Like, what am I doing with, you know, with my family, with my child? How can I best react to the change in circumstances in order to ensure our physical safety? This is something that, you know, very new, and of course, like taking a huge psychological toll on me.
Thank you very much, Olga, for your honest feedback and also personal introspection of how you feel the war. It's very important for us to understand these things. So we are grateful that you took the time to be with us today, because we understand that it's very difficult to keep all these appointments from zone of conflict. And as you mentioned, you don't know when things are developing in a bad way, but we hope that you are safe, and we are praying for your safety, for Ukrainians' safety, and we hope that Ukraine will win this war. Now I'm going to you, Lina, because I'm also curious about your personal understanding on how war affected you personally.
Thanks, Ionela. I mean, what I'm about to share is literally the margin of how the war has impacted women or impacted me. I think the real question, the answer that you would truly get is by asking this from the women in Afghanistan, because compared to what they're feeling, my feelings are really, or what I'm experiencing is really, really the tip of the iceberg. But with that being said, in August of 2021, when the whole collapse of the Kabul happened, we were put in a situation to evacuate my family. So I was fortunate to be outside of the country. I was studying abroad at that time, and we were able to put a network of people who got our family members out as they were at risk. I think some of the uncertainty that Olga mentioned for family deciding, do you stay, do you go, are you alive tomorrow? These were some of the stuff we heard from the other side, from my family, and sometimes going through this journey of trying to help them evacuate or help them get on a plane. It was traumatizing and heartbreaking. So we were on the phone with my family as they attempted to get into airports. And I'm sure as if you've seen the news of how the airport looked like during those months, it was pretty chaotic. There were thousands and thousands of people outside. So the family went through experience of getting shot at, getting trampled over, facing tear gas, and they were also traveling with 4 children. So for me, at times there was major guilt of, I'm trying to save their lives, but through this idea of freedom or try to get them out, I could also be very much responsible for their deaths. So that was the guilt that I had to live with every day. And where do we continue another attempt? Do we try to get them out? So, but without all being said, my family was one of the lucky ones. I am one of the lucky ones. I'm very privileged to be right now talking to you from a safety of my house in another place. But I think the journey that I want to shed light is that for those, whether you stay or whether you leave, the journey still requires strength and resilience. It's not easy either way. For those who have left the country, this idea of figuring out new life in a new country is challenging, because the circumstances many people left, it was not of like, hey, I'm going to pick up my life and start a new country. It was like, no, it was forced. They were forced to leave. They were forced to leave everything they have built, the education that they made, the house that they built, to leave everything they knew, not even with their paperwork, but just clothes on their bodies, and pick up their children and leave. Because at the end of it, it did provide this lens that to live in a life of dignity and the value of human life is more than anything around us. But as human beings, we still go through that process of loss and grieving. And there are days that I still am going through that. I'm sad and disheartened of seeing what's happening in the country. Now I'm disheartened about seeing girls not go to school. It brings a lot of memories of during the time we lived during the first Taliban regime in the country. So a lot of those experiences and flashbacks are coming. And for the family members who have left, there's always the need for assisting them with figuring out asylum cases, resettlement, learning the language, getting mental health and self-care assistance, because what the kids' experience was, for some of them, for the first time, killings around them that they had not ever seen. And these are children, we're talking about 3, 5, 7 years old, this is going to stay with them if they don't get the help they need. But I think too, and this thought as an advocate for human rights, and as a particular for the rights of women refugees, and as someone who is interested in the space of public policy, I think seeing the collapse of a state and a regime of rampant rights violation is heartbreaking, but it also encourages me to continue the work to ensure that this type of situation hopefully never again, or if it does happen, what are the tools that we have to prevent it, and what we can do to improve the situation through building the awareness and the networks that we have in place.
Thank you very much, Lina. That was a strong conclusion to your remarks. And I would like, Tamila, to give your perspective as a woman working in Abkhazia.
Olga said that she feels insecurity and uncertainty. I think this is a very burning point, and for every person who experienced the war or still experiencing the war, and it's something that's close to Abkhaz society and to me as well, as I also was born and raised up in Abkhazia. This uncertainty and insecurity that you feel every day, because yes, the war between Abkhazians and Georgians war 30 years ago, but still the question for Abkhaz society, will the war repeat again, is still on the agenda. There is a fear, and you live with this fear, and it's not only about the emotional conditions, but also about how you plan your life in the future. And for instance, if I take the young generations, there is not so much space for dreaming, and when you don't dream, you don't put the goals, you don't set your future, and you don't plan your future, because you don't know if this future will exist. You live with the past, because we commemorate many days, tragedy days, that the tragedies that have happened during the war, and we commemorate it every year, and there are many of them. There are still buildings that seems like the war was just 2 days ago maybe, and there are still also many memorials, yeah, that if you go to university or you go to school, you see all these memorials. You every day you live with this past that your old generation experienced, yeah, and its influence on you, and as a representative of young generations, also influence on me, and the other point that there is also not so much space for having opportunities. Yeah, as still we have the unresolved conflict, and the Abkhaz society is being in isolation, and there is no possibility to study abroad, for instance. It's maybe funny, yeah, I'm sitting in Berlin and telling it to you, but I'm an exception. I'm an exception, and also experienced the rejection of my visa when I wanted to study abroad, and only with the huge help of University of Germany, I was able to do that. But every year we have many rejections of visa because the Abkhaz society doesn't allow to cross the borders and to study abroad. I'm just telling about education, yeah, because you know how education then can influence when you come back and you're trying to do something for your society and society develop and all this stuff. It's yeah, so this two factors, it influence on how then the society, which life path the society choose. And when you don't have space for development, for space for also crossing borders, studying, if you don't have space for discussing sensitive topic openly, like you cannot develop. And this is the huge influence on every society who is society of a conflict zone.
Thank you very much, Tamila. And as our time is running out, I would like to thank our speakers for their great insight. It's very important for us to understand women's voices. So I'm grateful that you accepted our invitation and presented your views and women's views from your country to our Brussels audience. Thank you again for your excellent comments and ideas. And I also want to thank to our audience for joining us today and for sending their questions. We at EPC have many more events in the pipeline, so please follow us online and see you at the next event. Have an enjoyable afternoon, everyone. Stay safe and have a pleasant day from Brussels. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.